The glitch in the matrix. Why King was the ultimate system crasher. You ever walk into a mattress store in mid-January? It's a surreal experience, man. You got these fluorescent lights humming like they're trying to communicate with a distant hive mind, and there's a guy named Dave in a polyester blend polo trying to sell you a Dream Sleeper 3000 at 40% off in honor of a man who was assassinated for trying to overthrow the economic and moral status quo of the Western world. That's how we honor him, with markdowns and memory foam. It's like somebody took a prophet and ran him through a coupon printer. It's the ultimate cosmic joke. It's the kind of absurdity that makes me wonder if we're actually living in a simulation run by a bored teenager on a sugar crash. We took a radical, philosophical warrior, a man who looked at the Leviathan of American empire and didn't blink, and we turned him into a gentle grandpa who just wanted everyone to hold hands and buy mid-tier sedans during the holiday weekend. The culture sanded off every dangerous edge, slapped a quote on a poster, and called it closure. But here's the thing I can't let go of. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't just a civil rights leader. That label is too small. That's like calling Godzilla a large lizard, or calling the xenomorph from Alien a pest control issue. It's the kind of understatement that borders on a crime. King was a philosopher king in the truest Platonic sense, but instead of ruling a republic, he was trying to wake one up from a coma. He deserves way more credit not just because he marched, but because he understood the metaphysical architecture of oppression. He saw the wires. He saw the code. He was Roddy Piper in They Live, putting on the glasses, seeing the hidden billboards, and realizing the whole thing was an obedience farm. So I'm going to break this down, not with the flowery language of a Hallmark card, but with the cold, hard logic of the street and the library fused together like some weird buddy cop movie, Socrates and a guy from the loading dock solving crimes. I want to look at King through the lenses of Stoicism, Platonism, Kant, Bushido, and that whole conspiracy realism catalog people hide on their Kindle like it's smut. Because that's the only way to understand why the man was so dangerous, and why he's still so necessary. First, I had to rethink what I thought nonviolence meant. Most people treat nonviolence like it's a personality trait for doormats. Oh, you hit me. That's okay, I forgive you. Here, take my lunch money too. That's the cartoon version. That's the version you give second graders so they don't start doing wrestling moves at recess. But the more I sat with King, the more I realized his nonviolence was weaponized stoicism, psychological jiu-jitsu wrapped in Sunday clothes. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who spent half his life knee-deep in mud fighting Germanic tribes, said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." King took that principle and scaled it from the individual to the collective. When I watch old footage of Birmingham or Selma, I see two civilizations colliding. On one side, cops and sheriffs melting down, faces twisted, dogs unleashed, water cannons roaring, men completely ruled by their passions. They are, in the strict Stoic sense, enslaved. On the other side, marchers in pressed suits, dresses, and Sunday shoes, faces calm, bodies disciplined, walking straight into the blast. That isn't passive, that is a higher-level operating system. King understood something that sounds like a mashup of Epictetus and David Icke. When you meet brute force with brute force, you don't just fight people, you feed the system behind them. Call it the archons, the deep state, the reptilian brain, or just the ratings-driven news cycle, it feeds on chaos. If you fight the pig in the mud, you both get dirty, and the pig is loving life. By refusing to retaliate, King jammed the script. He created a glitch. The racist sheriff expected the savage Negro. Instead, he got a stoic samurai in a tie, practicing spiritual Bushido, the way of the warrior found not in death by sword, but in the death of ego. That's when you see the Matrix moment, Neo raising his hand and just saying, no. When the fire hoses hit and the marchers don't scatter, the bullets slow down. The American public, sitting at home with TV dinners, had to choose, who actually looks civilized here? Who looks like the barbarian? King leveraged the logos, reason, order, the rational structure of reality, to perform political warfare without firing a single shot. That's not soft. That's grandmaster-level strategy. Then there's the Platonic angle. Plato's allegory of the cave isn't just something you half remember from a philosophy elective, it's a diagnostic tool. In the cave, people stare at shadows on the wall, believing that's reality. The puppeteers behind them control what they see. Jim Crow America was a fully operational cave with sponsors and branding. The shadows were these carefully curated lies, separate but equal, states' rights, the happy, simple Negro, the whole Jim Crow cinematic universe. King, in my mind, was the guy who broke his chains, crawled up the tunnel, staggered into the blinding sunlight of truth, call it the form of the good, and then did the insane thing, he went back into the cave. Philosophically, that's the heroic act. Plato warns what happens next. The people don't throw you a parade. They try to kill you, because you're telling them the horse they've been worshipping is just a leather puppet on a stick. King's philosophy wasn't just political, it was ontological. He was interrogating the very being of America. He didn't just ask, are black citizens being treated fairly? He asked, what is justice? In a country that had built a legal system like a house of mirrors designed to always reflect white comfort back to itself. He leaned hard on natural law, the idea that there are moral constants baked into the structure of the universe like gravity. You can't just vote them away. If you jump off a roof, you fall. If you build a society on the degradation of human beings made imago Dei, in the image of God, that society will rot from the inside out. Through a Kantian lens, segregation is mathematically absurd. You can't will it as a universal law without turning the whole world into a caste system that eventually devours everyone, including the so-called winners. King was basically standing at the chalkboard of history saying, your moral calculus doesn't add up. Check your work. In that way, he was also functioning as America's therapist, diagnosing not just Southern psychosis but Northern neurosis, the genteel, polite racism that smiles at you, then redlines your neighborhood. What still rattles me is that King wasn't just trying to free the oppressed, he was trying to heal the oppressor. That's some next-level spiritual judo. He understood that the master chained to the role of master is also deformed. The white man who has to believe in black inferiority to feel big is spiritually stunted. King was trying to drag both out of the cave, which is why, and here's the irony, both sides in the cave had reasons to mistrust him. That's the fate of anybody who tries to interrupt a system that feeds on opposites. If I stopped there, we'd still be in the safe, civil rights leader, documentary zone. But the story gets much darker, and much more honest, when I follow King into what he called the triple evils, racism, materialism, and militarism. That's when he stopped orbiting the American conscience and started taking aim at the engine room. The system can survive desegregated lunch counters. It can profit from black professionals. It can print a stamp with your face on it. But it gets real twitchy when you start asking, why are poor people of all colors being ground into dust while a tiny class lives like they've got backstage passes to reality itself? When King began organizing the Poor People's Campaign, he was no longer just an inspirational figure, he was upgrading into something closer to what Joseph P. Farrell might call a threat to the breakaway civilization, the financial and political elite who live as if they're on their own separate planet. King started sounding less like a 1960s pastor and more like a cross between Amos, Malcolm X, and a calm, well-read conspiracy theorist at 3 a.m. talking about the Bilderbergers. He connected the dots. The same system that segregated buses was sending poor black and poor white kids to die in Vietnam to protect corporate interests. The same machine that starved children in Mississippi could somehow always find more money for bombs than for bread. It's like a cosmic version of that George Carlin bit. They got money for wars but they can't feed the poor. King said that before memes made it fashionable. Materialism, in his analysis, wasn't just about liking stuff. It was a counterfeit religion that inverted the proper order of love, things over people, profit over souls. We became penny wise and pound foolish with our humanity. We cut corners on compassion and then acted surprised when the whole building of society collapsed like a cheap set from the Truman Show. King saw that you could integrate the lunch counter all day, but if no one could afford a burger, the win was cosmetic. That's not integration, that's optical illusion. When he started building bridges between poor whites in Appalachia and poor blacks in the inner city, King was basically scripting a political version of the Avengers, disparate heroes finally realizing they've been fighting the wrong enemy. That's when the establishment looks up from its cigar and says, uh-oh. Because if the coal miner and the sharecropper ever figure out they're in the same movie, the credits roll early for the ruling class. And then there's the theological edge that still cuts. King didn't preach the soft, therapeutic spirituality that sells a lot of self-help books. He preached agape, the highest, hardest version of love. Not eros romantic swooning, not philia, beer and ballgame friendship, but the rugged, creative goodwill that seeks the good of the other even when the other is actively trying to crush you. That's the love that gets you crucified. In that sense, He was practicing kenosis, self-emptying. He poured out his fear, his comfort, his right to a quiet existence so that something bigger could flow through him. When he invoked the prophets, Amos roaring about justice rolling down like waters, Isaiah demanding that the people stop trampling the courts with empty rituals, he wasn't just citing them, he was stepping into that role. The prophets were the original conspiracy theorists, in the holy sense, guys on the margins yelling, your leaders are corrupt, your religion is fake, your economy is rigged, and judgment is coming. King belongs in that lineage. When he warned that a nation prioritizing military budgets over programs of social uplift was approaching spiritual death, that wasn't a policy quip, that was an oracle. Look around now. Trillions into war, infrastructure rotting, people medicating their anxiety with screens. The man read the room in the century. From another angle, he was also waging war against the reptilian brain, literally. The primitive part of us that responds with fight, flight, or freeze. Racism, greed, domination, these are reptile reflexes dressed up in suits. King's insistence on agape was an attempt to move us up the ladder, out of the lizard brain, through the mammal brain, into something approaching the imago Dei, the image-bearing consciousness all those ancient texts keep hinting at. It's like he was trying to initiate us into the Jedi Council while we were still arguing over who gets to swing the plastic lightsaber. But the part that humbles me most is what I can only call his Bushido moment. If Bushido is the way of the warrior found in death, then King was a spiritual samurai walking calmly toward an enemy that had already marked him for elimination. He knew he was going to die. He had death threats stacked like junk mail. His house was bombed. He was stabbed. He was jailed 29 times. By the time he gave the mountaintop speech, he was basically delivering his own eulogy. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. That line hits me like the last scene of Terminator 2, when the T-800 willingly lowers himself into the molten steel, knowing his continued existence endangers the future. King had that same clarity. I might have to leave so the work can live. He moved like a man who had already accepted his mortality. That's stoic freedom in its purest form. You can't threaten someone who has already negotiated with death and signed the paperwork. And this, ironically, is what real masculinity looks like. Not the truck commercial version with mud and grunting and emotionally constipated dudes. Real masculinity is standing in the line of fire for truth and the vulnerable with nothing but your convictions in a borrowed tie. Spartan courage, knightly chivalry, samurai resolve, they all converge in that balcony in Memphis. Now zoom out to our time. UFO disclosures, AI hallucinations, algorithms mining our dopamine like it's lithium, a political climate that feels like Idiocracy directed by David Lynch. We are deep in high strangeness territory. In this chaos, King's operating system isn't just relevant, it's mandatory. Because the real conflict isn't left versus right, blue versus red, donkey versus elephant. That's channel surfing. The deep conflict is consciousness versus control. King stood firmly on the side of consciousness. He wanted people awake. Not woke in the meme sense, but awake in the existential sense. The forces aligned against him, whether you name them the military-industrial complex, the global banking cartel, the archons, or just the board, were on the side of control. When we reduce King to a civil rights icon, we actually assist the control side by locking him in the past. We treat him like a patch that fixed version 1.0 of America's racism bug. Oh, that was back then. We had a dream, now we got a holiday, it's all good. Meanwhile, the chains went wireless. The plantation got upgraded to a global logistics network. The whip got replaced by metrics and debt. If I'm honest, I see King as a kind of bodhisattva in a Christian collar, a being who had tasted a higher freedom yet delayed his own safety to lift others. He's also got shades of a Jedi Master standing before the Senate, warning about the drift to the dark side while everyone else is busy with committee work. He grasped that injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere, not just poetically, but structurally, like a virus in one organ eventually sickens the entire body. That's quantum entanglement before Interstellar made it cool. And yes, they killed him. The official lone gunman story about James Earl Ray is about as sturdy as a folding chair from a dollar store. You don't need to read every book by Jim Marrs, Daniel Estulin, or Mark Dice to know that when somebody starts uniting the poor, challenging war, critiquing capitalism, and invoking God against empire, they've stepped directly onto the do not allow list. That's not paranoia, that's pattern recognition. But here's where the logic flips back in our favor. You can assassinate the man, but you can't assassinate the pattern he revealed. You can silence a voice, but you can't unring a bell. Once the cave has been described, you can never fully enjoy the shadows again. King shifted the frequency of the collective conversation, and that wave is still reverberating. Sometimes it's faint, sometimes it's drowned out by mattress sales and bland speeches. But it's there, so the next time I see a King Day blowout ad, I try not to just roll my eyes and get cynical. I laugh, but it's a knowing laugh, like Eddie Izzard doing theology in high heels or George Carlin detonating sacred cows with punchlines. I laugh at the absurdity of a system so terrified of a dead preacher's ghost that it has to bury his radicalism under discounts and platitudes. And then I remind myself, the joke cuts both ways. Because every time they mention his name, even cheaply, there's a chance someone wonders, what was he really about? That's my move. Go read, letter from Birmingham jail. Go read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. Don't just quote, I have a dream, like it's the chorus of a pop song. Read the verses they never play on TV. Follow the logic from civil rights to economic justice to anti-war to spiritual revolution. See the whole arc, not just the marketable clip. King wasn't just asking America to be nicer. He was asking America to repent, to turn around, to change its mind, to walk out of the cave. He showed that reality is more malleable than we think, but only if we're willing to put skin, and in his case blood, in the game. He proved that the line between myth and history can be crossed by one stubborn human armed with conviction, philosophy, and a terrifying lack of concern for his own safety. In a world of plastic politicians, algorithm-approved influencers, and spiritual snake oil, King still stands out like a monolith, strange, solid, demanding that we evolve. He was a diamond forged under the crushing pressure of centuries, and we still haven't fully understood his cut. So yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. deserves more credit, far more than a long weekend and a sale on bedroom furniture. He deserves to be recognized as what he was, a system crasher, a cave escaper, a warrior of agape, a stoic Bushido Platonic mashup who walked straight into the machinery of empire and jammed it with nothing but his voice, his body, and his refusal to hate back. The question isn't whether he deserves more credit. The question is whether we're brave enough to run his software on our own hardware. Whether we're willing to wake up, put on the glasses, see the glitches in our own time, and then do something about them, on the streets, in our jobs, in our families, in our own skulls. That's the King way, that's the Zerga way, and that's the only way out of the cave. Zerga, in synthesis with the philosophers.